The scorch of the sun was a physical weight pressing down on me, baking the already parched earth and turning the air into a shimmering, suffocating curtain. Heat shimmered off the sand, distorting the horizon into a blurry canvas of ochre and blinding white. My tongue felt like sandpaper, my throat a furnace. Stupid. So utterly, irrevocably stupid. I prided myself on being an experienced hiker. I'd navigated trails in the Rockies, trekked through Appalachian forests, even spent a week in the Icelandic highlands. But the Mojave was a different beast altogether. I'd underestimated it, lulled by the deceptively picturesque postcards and nature documentaries. I thought a day hike off the designated trail, just a little detour to explore a rumored slot canyon, would be a refreshing change of pace. Famous last words. Now, hours later, the sun was beginning to dip towards the western horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and angry oranges. Beautiful, yes, but terrifyingly beautiful because every fleeting moment of light brought me closer to the cold, suffocating embrace of desert night, alone and hopelessly lost. I'd been following what I thought was my return route, a vaguely familiar ridgeline, but the landscape had shifted, warped, or maybe my memory had simply betrayed me in the face of mounting panic. My water bladder was empty, drained long ago in a desperate attempt to stave off the relentless thirst. My phone, bless its useless heart, displayed no signal in mocking defiance. Fool. Utter fool. I'd let arrogance and wanderlust lead me into this desolate, unforgiving hell. As the shadows stretched long and skeletal across the sand, a new kind of fear began to prickle at the edges of my exhaustion and dehydration. It wasn't just the fear of dying of exposure, though that was a very real and immediate threat. It was a deeper, more primal unease, a feeling that I was no longer just lost in the desert, but lost in something else. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket that muffled even the whisper of the wind. In the city, silence was a luxury. Here, it was a weapon. Every rustle, every imagined sound sent jolts of adrenaline through my weary body. My eyes, strained from scanning the endless dunes, started playing tricks on me. Rocks became crouching figures, shadows elongated into monstrous shapes. Then I saw it. At first, I dismissed it as another mirage, another cruel joke played by the heat and my frayed nerves. A ripple in the air, a distortion of the light, just ahead of me where the setting sun bled into the sand. But it didn't dissipate. It solidified. It started as a shimmering, like heat haze intensified 1,000-fold, but it held a shape, an impossible, disconcerting shape. It was tall, impossibly tall, stretching upwards like a distorted column of heat, but sharper, more defined. It wasn't transparent, it seemed to absorb the light around it, creating a pocket of deepening dusk in the already fading daylight. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't heat exhaustion. This wasn't dehydration. This was wrong. Fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. The air grew colder, a sudden, unnatural chill that sliced through the desert heat. The silence intensified, becoming a thick, suffocating pressure in my ears. The ground beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with a low, resonant hum I could feel in my bones rather than hear. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the shimmering column coalesced. It solidified into something monstrous. It was vaguely humanoid in the broadest, most terrifying sense of the word. But where a human form relied on smooth curves and familiar proportions, this thing was all angles and distortions, a twisted mockery of anatomy. It was composed of what looked like overlapping planes of obsidian glass, catching the dying sunlight in fractured, malevolent glints. There were gaps in its form, holes that seemed to look into nothingness, swirling voids that pulsed with an inner darkness. It had limbs, long and spindly, ending in sharp, talon-like points that scraped against the sand as it moved. And it moved. It didn't walk, not in the way I understood walking. It shifted. One moment it was there, looming impossibly tall, the next it had slid forward several feet, as if gliding on invisible currents, its obsidian planes rearranging themselves with a sickening, clicking sound like grinding bones. Fear, raw and primal, flooded my system. My mind screamed for logic, for reason, for any explanation that could make sense of this impossible apparition. Hallucination? Mass psychosis brought on by dehydration? But the cold, the oppressive silence, the visceral wrongness of it, no, this wasn't my mind playing tricks. This was something real, something tangible, something terribly, impossibly real. I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed for flight, for escape from this nightmare-made flesh. But my legs were leaden, my body paralyzed by a fear so profound it felt like a physical weight pinning me to the spot. The creature, if it could even be called that, turned towards me. Or rather, its head turned. There wasn't a head in the traditional sense. At the top of its obsidian body was another void, larger than the others, a swirling vortex of shadow that seemed to drink in the remaining light. And from that void, I felt something gaze upon me. It wasn't sight as I understood it. It was something colder, more invasive, a feeling of being dissected by an unseen scalpel, of having my soul laid bare to something utterly alien. It was a gaze that pierced through my physical form, reaching into the deepest recesses of my being, and what it found there. I don't know, but it was enough to make me want to vomit. A sound emanated from the void head. Not a growl, not a hiss, not anything that human vocal cords could produce. It was a sound that resonated deep within my skull, a dissonant chord of pure wrongness, a cacophony of scraping metal and tearing fabric amplified to an unbearable volume, yet somehow existing just below the threshold of audibility. It was a sound that defied description, a sound that felt like it was tearing at the fabric of reality itself. The ground vibrated again, more intensely this time. The clicking and scraping of its movements grew louder as it began to approach. Slowly, inexorably, it advanced, its obsidian form shimmering in the fading twilight, a monument to something that could not exist in this world. My paralysis shattered. The survival instinct, buried deep beneath layers of fear, finally kicked in. I stumbled backwards, scrambling away, my legs finding a strength I didn't know they possessed. I didn't think, didn't plan, didn't even breathe. I just ran. I ran blindly, desperately, stumbling over rocks and dunes, the rasping clicks and scrapes of the creature's movement echoing behind me, growing louder with every panicked breath. I didn't dare look back. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if I stopped, if I faltered, it would be over. Whatever it was, it wanted something, and I had no desire to find out what. The desert night descended with terrifying speed, swallowing the last vestiges of light. Darkness became my ally, a cloak to hide me, though I knew it wouldn't be enough to hide me from it. The temperature plummeted, the cold seeping into my sweat-soaked clothes, making me shiver uncontrollably. But the chill from the creature, that unnatural, soul-deep cold, was far more profound. I ran for what felt like hours, driven by pure adrenaline and terror. My lungs burned, my muscles screamed, my throat felt like it was closing up. But I couldn't stop. The sound of its movement spurred me on, a constant, terrifying reminder of the nightmare pursuing me through the darkness. At some point, I tripped, sprawling onto the sand, the impact knocking the wind out of me. For a moment, I lay there, gasping, unable to move, convinced this was the end. I listened, my ears straining for the sound of its approach. Silence. Only the whisper of the wind, now a mournful wail across the dunes. Had I lost it? Had it given up the chase? I pushed myself to my feet, every movement in agony. My body was screaming for rest, for water, for escape. But I knew I couldn't stay there. Even if I had lost it for now, it could still be out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting. I stumbled onward, my directionless flight turning into a desperate wander. The landscape was featureless, an endless expanse of black sand under a sky dusted with cold, distant stars. The silence was still oppressive, but now it felt different, less charged. The unnatural cold had receded, replaced by the normal, bone-chilling cold of the desert night. Had I imagined it all? Was it truly just a hallucination, a product of dehydration and fear? A sliver of desperate hope flickered in my mind. Maybe, just maybe, it had all been a terrible dream. But then I saw it again. Not the creature itself, not directly, but something wrong. The stars. They were different. They were still there, the familiar constellations, the Milky Way, a hazy river of light across the sky. But interspersed among them and sometimes obscuring them were other lights. Faint, shifting, iridescent points of luminescence that pulsed with an unnatural glow. They weren't stars. They didn't twinkle. They breathed. And as I watched them, mesmerized by their impossible existence, I realized they weren't just points of light. They were shapes, vast, sprawling shapes outlined in luminescence against the black canvas of space. Shapes that were too large to be stars, too complex to be nebulae, shapes that defied any earthly or astronomical understanding. Shapes that shifted, changed, rearranged themselves in patterns that were both beautiful and profoundly disturbing. Terror, colder and more insidious than before, gripped me. This wasn't just a creature in the desert. This was something bigger, something cosmic. The creature, it was just a part of something far, far larger and more incomprehensible. The ground vibrated again, but this time it was different. Not the resonant hum of the creature, but a deeper, more pervasive tremor, a subtle shaking that seemed to emanate from the very bones of the earth. And then the air shimmered again, not in front of me this time, but all around me. The desert air itself seemed to ripple, to distort, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The iridescent lights in the sky pulsed brighter, their shifting shapes growing more defined. And as they did, the landscape around me began to change. The dunes shifted, not in the slow, natural drift of sand, but in sudden, jerky movements, rearranging themselves into impossible angles and unnatural inclines. The ground undulated beneath my feet, rising and falling in slow, sickening waves. The very air seemed to thicken, becoming viscous, heavy, pressing down on me with an almost tangible weight. And in the midst of this reality-bending chaos, I saw them. Figures, more of them emerging from the shimmering distortions of the air, coalescing out of the swirling darkness. Not just one obsidian creature, but many. Dozens. Hundreds. Their impossible forms shimmering in the unnatural light from the sky, their clicking and scraping movements creating a cacophony of dissonant sound that echoed across the warped landscape. They weren't all the same as the first one I saw, though they shared the same unsettling angularity, the same obsidian planes, the same void-like emptiness where faces should be. Some were larger, more grotesque, with multiple limbs and twisted appendages. Some were smaller, almost insect-like, scuttling across the distorted sands with terrifying speed. But all of them were wrong. Utterly, profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. And they were coming for me. Not with overt aggression, not with a chase or a roar. They simply moved, flowed, shifted towards me, an inexorable tide of impossible geometry closing in from all directions. There was no malice in their movement, no hatred, just a cold, indifferent inevitability. It was as if I was an anomaly, a glitch in their reality, and they were simply correcting it. I knew with a despair that crushed my soul that there was no escape. Running was pointless. Hiding was futile. This wasn't just the desert anymore. This was something else, something that had bled into the desert or perhaps had always been there, hidden beneath the veil of normalcy, and now somehow I had stumbled into it. I sank to my knees in the shifting sand, exhaustion and terror finally overwhelming me. My mind, stretched to its breaking point, began to unravel, to lose its grip on reality. The iridescent lights in the sky pulsed, the obsidian figures closed in, the ground undulated beneath me. It was the end. But then something shifted again. Not the landscape, not the creatures, but me. Or rather, my perception. It was as if a veil, thicker and more profound than the veil of normalcy, was lifted from my eyes. And I saw differently. The obsidian figures, they weren't solid. Not in the way I understood solidity. They were patterns. Complex, shifting patterns of energy vibrating at frequencies my normal senses couldn't perceive. The ground beneath me, it wasn't sand. It was a membrane. A thin, fragile membrane stretched across something vast, something immeasurable, something alien. And the iridescent lights in the sky, they weren't stars. They were eyes. Immense, incomprehensible eyes belonging to beings so vast, so beyond human comprehension that they dwarfed even the distorted landscape around me. Beings that spanned dimensions, realities, concepts I couldn't even grasp. And those beings, they were aware of me. They weren't hostile, not exactly, but they were curious. I was a curiosity, an anomaly, a fleeting spark of consciousness in a universe so vast and alien it made my very existence meaningless. The obsidian patterns flowed closer, not with intent to harm, but with observation. They were studying me, probing me, unraveling the intricate tapestry of my being, examining every thought, every emotion, every fear. And as they did, I felt myself dissolving. Not physically, not in a painful or violent way, but my sense of self, my individuality, my ego, it began to fray, to unravel, to merge with the patterns around me. The fear receded, replaced by a strange kind of acceptance, a sense of merging with something larger, something beyond comprehension. It was like returning home. but a home I had never known, a home that existed outside of space and time, a home that was both terrifying and strangely comforting. The last thing I remember before my consciousness fragmented and dissolved into the patterns was the feeling of being seen. Truly seen in a way no human being had ever seen me. Stripped bare of all pretense, all illusion, all individuality, and simply understood. Then there was nothing. Just the patterns, the iridescent eyes, the vast, incomprehensible everything. I woke up with a gasp, choking on sand, the sun beating down on my face with merciless intensity. My head throbbed, my body ached, my throat was parched beyond belief. Confusion warred with a lingering, terrifying memory. The obsidian creatures, the shifting landscape, the eyes in the sky, had it all been a dream? A nightmare induced by dehydration and heat stroke? I was lying face down in the sand, disoriented and weak, but alive. And around me, it was just the desert. The normal desert. Harsh, unforgiving, but recognizably, terrifyingly normal. No obsidian creatures, no shifting dunes, no iridescent eyes in the sky. Just sand, rocks, and the relentless, burning sun. Slowly, painfully, I sat up. My water bladder was still empty, my phone still useless. But I was alive. And different. Something had changed. Something deep within me had shifted. The memory of what I had seen, what I had felt, was burned into my mind, a visceral, unshakable experience that defied logic and reason. It felt real, too real to be just a dream. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaky, my body weak, but with a strange sense of purpose. Or maybe not purpose, but direction. I didn't know where I was, but I knew intuitively which way to go. As if something within me, something beyond my conscious understanding, was guiding me. And as I walked, as I stumbled through the familiar yet somehow subtly altered desert landscape, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had glimpsed behind a curtain, had seen something that was not meant to be seen, had touched a reality that should not, could not exist. The desert was still there, indifferent and eternal. But now, when I looked at it, I saw something else beneath the surface. A hint of the patterns, a flicker of iridescent light in the shimmering heat haze, a subtle unease in the oppressive silence. The desert hadn't changed, but I had. I had gotten lost in the desert, and what I encountered shouldn't exist. And a part of me, a terrifying, exhilarating, fundamentally altered part of me, knew that it still did. And maybe, just maybe, it was still watching, waiting for me to get lost again.